Alright, so I went to leave work this afternoon and I ran into a pothole there in the parking lot at work, and I heard a loud clunk. But loud clunks aren't, you know, when you drive a stiff lowered car, loud clunks kind of go with the territory. But it wasn't the only loud clunk. After that, every time I hit a bump, there's more clunking and some clanking. Something's broken. I don't know what happened. The steering did not get loose. The steering stayed the same, so I suspect I may have broken a sway bar end link. Don't know. I'm going to jack it up and see what we got here. Now that already looks wrong. I've got some severe positive camber there. The strut top is still in place. So I probably shouldn't have drove that home. But again, I said, I didn't feel any wonkiness in the steering. Yeah, Mustang's down for the count. That's a broken strut there. It looks like the top of the strut still bolted down up top. That's not good. So Mustang's down for the count. So I feel the need to point something out about this. If you look at this, if it'll focus, that is a clean break, and it hadn't happened long. It's not all beat up on the end. So it tells me that it just happened today, and it wasn't cracked previously. Yeah. I don't think that was cracked previously. I think that just... And I hit a pothole in the work parking lot. I had the wheels cranked to the left. I was turning and I hit a pothole, and that's when I heard the clunk. If it had been broken partway through, you'd see where it'd been beat up on here. I can see where there's a couple, that divot in the middle with the outside. Oh, come on, focus. I don't know. Maybe when I get the rest of the strut out, I'll see. But I've got to move the Mustang actually and park it until the parts come in, and then jack it up and do it. But it's parked behind the Jaggernaut right now, and I might be selling that this weekend. So I'm gonna put this back together and carefully back the Mustang out. So, yep, more to come. So I was hoping to sell a Jaguar today, and the seller's leaving right now. The buyer's leaving right now, heading back home. And he flew all the way here to look at the car, and the car was running good until it wasn't. In that last video, the car was stalling out whenever I was trying to get back in the shop. I played with the tuning, and that didn't fix it. The transmission has gone out. It ran fine around the yard, and actually I can get it to drive around the yard right now, but when you put it in gear, it tries to die. It seemed like maybe a torque converter issue, but I put it in neutral, and it was still trying to drive, so it's a never-ending deal with this car, and this is part of the reason I want to get rid of this car. But at the same time, it's such a beautiful car, and it's, wicked sounding. The video doesn't translate that really well, but it sounds awesome in person. And then just it fails all the time. So the buyer's not buying, and I can't blame them. I did everything I could to try to get this car ready, and I made some last-minute fixes on some of the wiring issues. I got the alternator light is working fine. The alternator's charging fine now. The oil pressure light is working like it's supposed to. I rejetted the carburetor and fixed the lean bog by upping the accelerator pump shock. But if the transmission isn't going to work, we're kind of dead in the water. He's not a local buyer. He was going to have the car transported to where he lives. And if you can't get the car in gear, a transporter's not going to take it. You have to have a car that they can drive onto their trailer. Yeah. So anyway, that's where I'm at with the Jaguar. Now it looks like I'm going to have to pull the transmission out and see if I can figure out what's going on with it. I got, the torque converter, when the torque converter went in, it went in nice. I got 3 clunks out of it. The alignment was right. It wasn't hard up against the flywheel. It wasn't way ways from it. It was positioned nicely, so the torque converter should have been fine. I don't know why the transmission's acting up. I'm gonna have to pull it apart. Luckily, it looks like, for the most part, everything else is getting fairly nailed down. I got to bleed the brakes. I did realize that the brakes aren't strong enough to hold this thing right now when it's trying to run in gear. It's jacked up in the back right now, so we could run through the gears. The transmission wouldn't shift gears, and when I put it in neutral, I put my foot on the brakes, and it wouldn't stop the rear wheels from turning. So the rear brakes the brakes in general need bleeding, and the transmission needs to come out. The brake issue, I knew the brakes needed bled, and I made the buyer aware of that. And that was part of the deal. Was there's still some work to be done before this thing goes on track. But the transmission not working right is a serious issue. That's what do you do? I can't sell the car unless I sell to a local team that's willing to tow it. I can't get rid of the car as it is. So I've got to pull the transmission out and go through it and figure out what's going on. A little bit of schooling on the transmission. This is a TH400, and it is a Cadillac TH400, but it has been converted from the Cadillac tail to the short tail, which involves the shorter end housing. When GM made these, I think there was 4 tails, maybe 3, but actually and then you get into the 4-wheel drive stuff. You had the short tail, which is like a 4-inch tail. You had the long tail, which was a 7-inch tail, and then they had the Cadillac tail, which was 10 or 11 inches long, if I remember right. And that's what this had in it. And when I had the transmission rebuilt, I was looking at shoehorning the engine and transmission into a Camaro for a while, and I had the transmission rebuilt with the short tail. But the transmission has maybe 1,000 miles on it since it got rebuilt, but it's been 25 years ago that it was rebuilt. And it's been in and out of a few things, and never driven that. It's never been driven hard. It was driven by Grandma on her way to church. It's been raced a few times, but it ran fine. And when we took it to Houston back in 2017, the transmission worked fine. Now the transmission doesn't want to work anymore. So, yeah, I'll pull it apart and see what I got. I'm not sure when that's going to happen. My goal is to have the car running again before springtime, before the first autocross of the season. So if I get a warm weekend, that transmission's coming out. I don't like wrenching in the cold, though. So that's going to be my hardest issue, is getting over that hump of getting out here to work when it's cold. So. All right, it's Monday afternoon. The shipper says the new struts for the Mustang ought to be in today. Hopefully they show up today. If not, tomorrow. But I've got, if the parts don't show up until tomorrow, they're likely not going to show up until like 7 o'clock at night. And that means I've got to throw the parts in the dark so I can leave Wednesday morning. I'm going to get ahead on this a little bit and zip the struts out of here and get it ready so I can just slam it back together once I get the parts. Now, ideally, you would align a car after you put new struts in it. I'm not going to have that opportunity, but I can always put a tape measure on it and make sure it's at least somewhere close. We'll see if I even do that. But I got to get the car up and running. So, yeah. All right, so the part where I was disassembling the car was just about an hour ago, and went back in the house, and don't you know what, the shipper came by and delivered my struts. Now these were in a bigger box, but still, it's kind of obvious that somebody dropped this and knocked this wire loose. This wire's here to hold the strut down while it's in transit. Does it concern me that they drop it? Yeah. Is it going to destroy the strut? More than likely not. The damage you do just driving your car every day, your strut's going to take impacts from the potholes and everything else. So I don't think, so long as the threads up here are good, I don't think it's going to be a problem for the strut. The threads are still good. I don't think there's any damage done. Now it's time to switch all my parts over. Now I don't know if you noticed, but on the original struts I had on here, the previous struts, the Steedas, I had them double nutted to keep the nuts from coming off the top. These have lock nuts, which is what you should have anyways. I don't know why. Anyways, so that strut's already torn apart by service of the pothole. So let's get into putting this on. I've got my strut compressor here. If you're gonna do struts, you have to have one of these tools. There's several different kinds. There are the two little simple hook pieces that you can buy for like 50 bucks or 40 bucks to compress a strut. Oh my gosh, those things are so dangerous. I've wrestled with a few struts with those, and never again. I bought a professional strut tool because I was sick and tired of almost killing myself trying to do struts. Step up, buy one of these. Now that said, I loaned this to a coworker a couple of years back, and he had nothing but trouble with it. Well, I've had it for years and years and used it and threw it in the tool bin and got it back out. And I had to take it all the way apart and lube everything, put it back together to get it back to where it works right. So anyways, so looking at the old strut, this is going to go on first. And I believe it goes on this way. I suppose I should check up under the hood of this one and make sure. Nope, I got it upside down. Been a few years since I've had these struts apart. Okay. Now, I may be able to get these on without the strut compressor. These are lowering springs, and so they sit lower, and it looks like it may go on without it. Now the Steeda logo here goes out towards the outside of the strut. And if I had another 50 pounds, I might be able to get that on. Not going to go on by itself. So, time to use the spring compressor. All right, so the whole shaft is trying to spin on me. I'm gonna have to get a wrench out. I'm gonna have to hold this top piece. And that's gonna take a minute. At the same time, I could probably torque this down a little bit further. You want the spring below the cap. You don't want it to have any tension on it. And while you're doing this process, treat this gently. You got to remember that spring's under tension. When I worked at the auto dealership, we referred to the strut machine as the Widowmaker, and that was a good one that was not likely to kill you. And the cheaper you go, the more dangerous they are. Get a decent one, and this one I think is fairly decent. I got the strut top tight. Make sure everything's aligned. You want the spring, there's a cutout up here for the spring. You want it butted all the way up against it. Make sure my fingers are out of, the bottom of the strut is not. There we go, now it's all the way up there. I want to make sure my fingers are out of the way of the spring when it comes up. I'll launch the socket. I don't want that one. Oh, I didn't lose my socket. I lost where I was. All right, there we go. Spring's in. Now I could probably take this one apart without the spring compressing tool just because the spring is not under that much tension. But would you bet your life on it? I'm not. Now part of your problem with picking one of these up is the coils aren't always even, especially if you got a progressive rate spring. And so the tool's going to want to sit crooked. I'm going to have to come from the back side of this one, I think, because that's where I finally got enough. Yep, that's where it's finally got enough space on it to get a hold of it. I couldn't get this through the spring until I spun it around here. There's not enough room between these two coils. Make sure your fingers aren't in a place they're going to get pinched. And so the Steeda struts, instead of having an external hex, they have an internal hex. So I gotta get out a hex wrench to take this one off. Alternatively, since this is trash, you can just put a pair of vice grips in here on the shaft and zip it off. Maybe the easier way to go about this, but don't lose that. Don't want to get it dirty either. I'm probably going to put a dab of grease in there. Not probably, I do need to. I'm not going to take that off because I'm going to leave that under tension and leave it like that. So just put it on the new one. Okay. So the Mustang does have a set of Steeda camber plates up top, and basically, from what I understand, the Ford pieces failed almost immediately on the Mustang. Within it was just out of warranty when they went bad, and the Steeda kit was not terribly expensive, and it replaced everything at the top with metal pieces. And I believe one of the Ford parts was a load-bearing part made of plastic, which was absolutely stupid. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe it wasn't plastic, but it sure didn't last long. So, the Steeda parts have been very reliable. The Steeda strut tops. The Steeda struts weren't, but you know, I don't know who makes those for them. I don't imagine that Steeda actually makes those. I think they had them spec'd out and had another company making them for them. And they worked great right up until they didn't. Right here. So the main thing this affects is your steering. If this goes bad and it seizes up, your steering's going to get rock hard all of a sudden. If you don't know, PB Blaster works really great as a cleaning agent. So, time to get this together. Make sure I don't have any parts missing. I've got the bushing in the cover. Stand this up. trying to not to put my head over that. Okay, there we go. The Speedo logo is pointing towards the outside of the strut. I'm going to wash over the top. So if you're not familiar, this centerpiece here is rubber, and that gives you some of your isolation from vibration. Is it going to zip down? Probably not. Let's see if we get lucky. Yeah, that's a no. Make sure my fingers aren't in pinchy places. All right, the spring is sitting where it needs to be. We are good. That's both struts assembled. Time to get them back in the car. So the struts came painted, and the hole for the little bolt that holds the brake line in place was clogged with paint. So instead of trying to use an angled socket or a wobble socket to put that bolt through, I got my straight socket and just cleaned up the threads with the little impact gun. Carefully, mind you, and it worked. Alright. So I just got to torque down the top of the strut, and honestly, when I take this racing, I put the camber all the way in. You can never have enough camber on a McPherson strut car. When I'm driving on the street, I pull that all the way out. So that's how I'm going to tack this down. I want these tight, but I don't want them so tight that I'm in danger of breaking the strut. You can see that one's still loose. That's not tight enough. That one's about right. That one's not tight enough. These aren't lug nuts. They are bolts. They can be stripped, and I don't have the time and money to replace them. So I'm going to get them nice and tight, but not crazy tight. There we go. Now the other side and I'll be done. Except to put the wheels back on. Alright, that's the new struts in. I don't know if you noticed, but when I was tightening up that wheel over there, I started tightening, and then I stopped. I got the impact out and zipped the lug nuts back just a little bit. Two of the lug nuts were already past the torquing point when I went to torque them. So because I didn't get any movement out of them, I went ahead and pulled them back off a little bit and then torqued them down to the right torque. And now that I'm done, I'm returning my torque wrench to 0 so that the spring inside here doesn't get wore out. But that's it. It's done. Time for a test drive, and I might take it out to dinner tonight.